Okay, let's go ahead and look at example number 2. So what I'm going to do is pause the video, go ahead and read through this, and if there's anything you need to write down, underline, make note of, go ahead and do that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to check the conditions for constructing a confidence interval we call a z-interval for a population proportion. Now, I believe if you read through this and you go to part B, we're going to, if we can, construct a 95% confidence interval for the true proportion of adults who respond that the death penalty was applied fairly. So when I go back to check these conditions, I want to make sure I do that for the 58% who answered the survey saying that they think they believe the death penalty is applied fairly. So in that case, we know that p hat is equal to 0.58, the sample proportion of people who feel that the death penalty is applied fairly. The sample consists of 510 randomly selected adults. So when we want to check our conditions, first off, it needs to be a random sample. And it says that right here. It was a simple random sample. B says, I should say B, but the next condition is our sample less than 10% of the population? Therefore, if that's the case, we can then use the rules for independence, which makes our calculations a lot easier. So all we need to do is then take 10 times our sample size to get the lower limit of what our population size has to be in order for our sample to be less than 10% of that. So if we do that, we get 5,100 adults. Now, I don't know, again, this doesn't say if they polled people in a town, in a state, in the country, but I'm assuming that the population that they did sample from has more than 5,100 adults. So we're going to make that assumption. So we're going to say there are more than 5,100 adults in the population. Okay, we're going to assume that the population has more than 5,100 adults, therefore our sample is less than 10% of the population, so we can use the rules for independence. And then finally, to make sure we got a normal distribution, n times p hat, which is 510 times 0.58, which is 296. That is larger than 10. And then n times 1 minus p hat, which is 510 times 0.42, is 214. And that is also larger than 10. So by these two being larger than 10, we know that we have our sampling distribution is approximately unimodal bell-shaped and normal. So with that, all those being met, we can proceed. We are okay to proceed. All right. So let's go to part B then. Let's go ahead, let's construct a 95% confidence interval for the true proportion of adults who responded that the death penalty was applied fairly. Okay, so what our formula is, ladies and gentlemen, again, for a 95% degree confidence, I should say this, p hat again for fairly was 0.58, n was, I believe it was 510. Now, since we know that we have a 95% confidence level, then our critical z value of alpha divided sub alpha divided by 2 is going to be 1.96 again. That doesn't change, okay, for 95% level of confidence on a z interval. So, here we go. So, to set up your confidence interval, we take p hat plus or minus our critical z value times our standard error, which is p hat times 1 minus p hat all over n. And then we just fill in the values. So p hat again for the people, the proportion of people who thought the death penalty was applied fairly, is 0.58 plus or minus 1.96 times 0.58 times 1 minus 0.58, which I believe would be 0.42, all over 510, right? So now if we do the calculations again, and make sure you don't round, I know it gets arduous, but use the memory function on your calculator. But if you take the radical and you work that out, you get 0.021855 and then onward a quarter. Now, that right there, ladies and gentlemen, that right there is your standard error. So if I ever want to ask what the standard error is, there it is. Now, if we take that times our critical value, that'll help us to compute our margin of error. So if we do that, and again, I went back and already did the calculations without doing any rounding, you get 0.04283607. And that right there again, that is your margin of error. Might be beneficial in the next part. So then I might go a tad bit over 7 minutes here, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm going to try to keep it not too far over. So if we take 0.58 minus this margin of error, and we round to 3 significant digits, we get this, 0.537. Rho. If we take 0.58 plus this margin of error rounded to 3 significant digits, we get 0.623. Okay? Now, that right there is your 95% confidence interval. No labels needed. That was part B. Now, why I'm going to just quickly go over a little bit over 7 minutes here is because now let's know for part C, what was the margin of error? Well, we found that right here. This right here is your margin of error. And I'm going to just take it out to 3 significant digits. So this is part D. And your margin of error is just equal to 0.0428. That right there is your margin of error. And in the next video, we'll finish up and we'll look at parts D